Welcome, friends. This is Richard Wolff. I want to speak to you today about something that is happening right now, something that the mainstream media is desperate to ignore, desperate to minimize, because it terrifies them. It terrifies the ruling class in the United States, and it should be a wake-up call for the working class everywhere. We are witnessing a profound fracture in what was supposed to be the most stable, the most boring, the most eternal alliance in the history of modern capitalism, the relationship between the United States and Canada. Now, usually, when we talk about geopolitics, we are trained to look at the enemies Washington points at. We look at China, we look at Russia, we look at the Middle East. We are told day in and day out that the threat comes from the other, from the outside, from those who hate our freedom. But Marxian analysis teaches us something different. It teaches us to look for the contradictions within the system. It teaches us that capitalism is not a stable structure that only breaks when someone throws a rock at it from the outside. No. Capitalism is a system that produces its own failures, its own antagonisms, and eventually its own gravediggers. And what we are seeing between Ottawa and Washington today is exactly that, an internal contradiction of Western imperialism ripening, bursting open, and revealing the rot underneath. We have received reports, very disturbing reports for the Pentagon, regarding a document titled Project Maple Leaf. Now, the name sounds pleasant enough, doesn't it? It sounds like a bottle of syrup. But the reality of what is contained in this new defense industrial strategy from Canada is a declaration of independence that borders on a declaration of hostility. We are talking about Mark Carney. Understand who this man is. He is not a radical. He is not a socialist. He is the former governor of the Bank of England, the former governor of the Bank of Canada. He is the ultimate technocrat, a man of the system, a man who has spent his entire life managing the affairs of the bourgeoisie. When a man like Mark Carney stands up and says that the United States is no longer a reliable partner, that the United States is a security threat, you have to understand that the tectonic plates of global capitalism are shifting. The headline figure is $6.6 billion. That is the amount Canada is allocating to build what they call a sovereign military capability. Now, catch that word, sovereign. In the language of diplomacy, specifically between a hegemon like the US and a junior partner like Canada, sovereign is a dirty word. For 70 years, since the end of the Second World War, the deal was simple. The United States provides the security umbrella. The United States runs NATO. The United States builds the weapon systems, and Canada, along with Europe, Japan, and the rest, buys the systems, integrates the systems, and does what it is told. That was the Pax Americana. That was the deal. Canada didn't need a sovereign capability because its sovereignty was effectively subcontracted to Washington in exchange for economic integration. But now we read that Canada is building a sovereign kill chain. They are building defense systems designed explicitly to operate independently of the United States. They are preparing for a threat from the South. Think about that phrase, a threat from the South. They are not looking over the North Pole at Russia anymore. They are looking across the 49th parallel at us. Why? Why would they do this? Is it because they suddenly hate Americans? No. It is because the material conditions of the United States empire have changed. The United States is no longer the stable, undisputed guarantor of global capitalist profit. It has become volatile. It has become erratic. It has become a nation tearing itself apart at the seams politically, socially, and economically. And capital, Canadian capital, represented by men like Carney, is cowardly. Capital hates uncertainty, and when the giant next door starts stumbling, the smart money starts building a fence. I want you to reflect on the historical significance of this. We are taught that the US Canada border is the longest undefended border in the world. It is the symbol of peaceful coexistence. But in dialectical analysis, we know that every relationship under capitalism is a power relationship. It is a relationship of dominance and submission. For decades, Canada accepted a submissive military role because it was profitable. It allowed their ruling class to accumulate wealth without spending massive amounts on defense, piggybacking on US imperialism. But now that calculation has flipped. The cost of being tied to the sinking ship of American hegemony has become higher than the cost of building their own lifeboat. That is what this $6.6 billion is. It is the down payment on a lifeboat. And let's look deeper into the specifics of this Project Maple Leaf. They aren't just buying guns. They are restructuring their entire defense industrial base to cut the United States out of the loop. They are talking about securing the Arctic. Now, the Arctic is the next great frontier of resource extraction. Oil, gas, minerals, shipping lanes opening up due to climate change. The United States views the Arctic as its backyard, but Canada is saying, no, this is our backyard, and we do not trust you to protect it, and more importantly, we do not trust you not to steal it. This is a classic inter-imperialist rivalry emerging where there used to be unity. Lenin wrote about this over 100 years ago. He explained that alliances between capitalist powers are always temporary. They hold only as long as the division of the spoils is satisfactory to all parties. When the rate of profit falls, when markets shrink, when one power declines, the knives come out. The alliance dissolves into competition, but the military aspect, frightening as it is only the superstructure. As Marxists, we must always go to the base. We must look at the economy, and this is where the situation becomes truly explosive. The reports we are seeing indicate that Canada is not just arming itself, it is preparing to weaponize its financial system against the United States. This is the financial kill switch referenced in the analysis. You see, most Americans do not realize how deeply integrated Canadian banks are into the U.S. economy. We see the TD Bank signs on our corners in New York, in Boston, in Florida. We see RBC, we see BMO. These are not just foreign banks visiting. They are massive holders of U.S. debt. They hold U.S. mortgages. They hold commercial real estate loans. They finance American small businesses. The report suggests that Canadian banks are holding a significant percentage of the U.S. mortgage market and commercial loans in key strategic regions. In a normal world, this is just business. It's the free flow of capital. But in a world where the alliance is breaking, this debt becomes leverage. It becomes a weapon. If Canada were to coordinate a sudden withdrawal of credit, a sudden dumping of these assets, or a tightening of liquidity in the U.S. market, it could trigger a financial crisis that would make 2008 look like a picnic. And unlike 2008, the Federal Reserve might not be able to bail everyone out if the attack is coming from a sovereign state using its banking sector as a tool of geopolitical strategy. This is what happens when you financialize your economy to the extent that the United States has. We stopped making things. We sent the factories to China, to Mexico, to Vietnam. And what did we build instead? We built a financial casino. We built an economy based on debt, on speculation, on rents. And when you build an economy on debt, you are at the mercy of your creditors. For a long time, we thought our creditors had no choice but to support us because the dollar was king. But what Canada is signaling here is that the king is naked. They are signaling that they have the capacity to inflict pain, real economic pain, on the American working class and the American middle class to protect their own interests. And let's be clear about who suffers in this scenario. It won't be Mark Carney. It won't be the executives at TD Bank or the defense contractors at Lockheed Martin. It will be you. It will be the American worker whose mortgage is suddenly called in or whose interest rate spikes because of a geopolitical standoff. It will be the small business owner whose credit line dries up because a bank in Toronto decided to de-risk its American exposure. This is the tragedy of our system. The decisions are made in boardrooms and situation rooms by people who will never miss a meal, while the consequences are borne by the people who actually produce the wealth in this society. We have to ask ourselves, how did we get here? How did the United States squander so much power, so much goodwill, that even Canada, polite, deferential Canada, is preparing for war, or at least preparing for a hostile separation? It is because of the arrogance of the American ruling class. They believed their own propaganda. They believed that history had ended, that their dominance was a law of nature. They ignored the crumbling infrastructure at home. They ignored the grotesque inequality that has hollowed out the legitimacy of American democracy. They ignored the fact that you cannot run a global empire when your own population is sick, tired, poor, and angry. Mark Carney and the Canadian elite see this. They are reading the same data we are. They see the political polarization in the US. They see the possibility of civil unrest. They see the paralysis in Congress, and they are making a rational capitalist calculation. The United States is a bad investment. And when you decide an asset is a bad investment, what do? You divest, you hedge, you protect yourself. That is what Project Maple Leaf is. It is the ultimate hedge against the collapse of the American empire. But there is another layer here, a deeper contradiction. By making this move, by announcing this separation, Canada actually accelerates the decline they are afraid of. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If the U.S. loses the unquestioned support of its closest neighbor, its projection of power globally is weakened. If the U.S. financial system is shown to be vulnerable to Canadian pressure, the sharks in the water, the other competing powers, will smell blood. It exposes the fragility of the entire U.S.-led order. And we must also talk about the rhetoric being used, reclassifying the United States as a security threat. This is language usually reserved for rogue states. It is a psychological break. It tells the Canadian population and the world that the U.S. is dangerous. And frankly, from a certain perspective, they are right. An empire in decline is dangerous. A wounded animal is dangerous. When the U.S. ruling class realizes that it is losing its grip, that even its friends are turning away, how will they react? Will they react with introspection? Will they say, maybe we should fix our economy, maybe we should stop exploiting the world and treat our partners as equals? History suggests no. History suggests that dying empires lash out. They become more aggressive, more militaristic, more desperate to reassert control through force because they can no longer maintain it through economic attraction. So this move by Canada increases the danger of conflict. It heightens the tensions. It brings the instability of the global system right to our doorstep. We are no longer talking about wars in distant lands. We are talking about a fracture in the North American continent itself. And for the working class, this is a disaster. It is a distraction from the real struggle, which is the struggle between the employers and the employees, the struggle for a system that puts human needs above profit. Instead, we are going to be fed a steady diet of nationalism, of fear, of blame Canada or blame the foreigner to distract us from the fact that our own economic system is failing us. In the next part of this discussion, I want to go deeper into the specific mechanisms of this financial leverage. I want to explain exactly how the banking system links our two countries and why unraveling that link is so dangerous. But for now, understand this: the era of the unified West is over. The contradictions have become too great to contain. The special relationship is dead, killed by the relentless grinding logic of capitalist competition and imperial decline. And we, the people, need to understand this, not to take sides in a fight between American and Canadian elites, but to understand that neither of them has our interests at heart. They are playing a game of chess with our lives, our homes, and our futures. And until we change the game, until we change the system, we will always be the pawns. Welcome back, friends. This is Richard Wolff, and we are continuing our analysis of this extraordinary rupture between the United States and Canada, a rupture signaled by a $6.6 billion military shift that the Pentagon never saw coming. In the first part, we looked at the military-industrial complex, the hardware, the sovereign kill chains. But now we must turn our attention to the quiet, invisible, and far more deadly mechanism of power, the financial system. We need to talk about what has been described in these reports as a financial kill switch. When we talk about warfare in the 21st century, we are conditioned to think of missiles, drones, and aircraft carriers. But the most devastating weapons in the arsenal of modern capitalism are not explosive, they are transactional. They are lines of credit, they are mortgage bundles, they are the overnight repo markets where banks lend to each other to stay afloat. And this is where the Canadian strategy becomes truly terrifying for the American ruling class. You see, for the last 30 years, while American banks were busy gambling on derivatives and blowing up the global economy in 2008, Canadian banks, conservative, regulated, massive, were quietly buying up the United States. Walk down the street in New York, in Boston, in Florida, what do you see? You see TD Bank, you see BMO, you see RBC. These are not just storefronts, they are massive reservoirs of capital. The reports indicate that these institutions hold a staggering amount of U.S. debt. They hold the mortgages on American homes. They hold the commercial loans that keep American shopping malls and office parks open. They finance the small businesses that are the so-called backbone of the American economy. In a stable alliance, this is just integration. It is efficient. But in a conflict, in a relationship where one side has declared the other a security threat, these assets stop being business opportunities and start being hostages. Imagine the scenario. The political tension spikes. Washington demands Canada fall in line on some foreign policy adventure, perhaps in the Arctic, perhaps in the Pacific. Instead of sending troops, Ottawa makes a phone call to Toronto. Suddenly, the credit windows at these massive Canadian subsidiaries in the U.S. start to close. They don't have to announce it. They just change their risk parameters. They decide that American real estate is too risky. They stop rolling over commercial paper. They stop buying U.S. Treasury bonds. They begin to liquidate their positions in the U.S. housing market. What happens then? You get a liquidity crisis, you get a credit crunch. But unlike 2008, this isn't caused by bad math. It is caused by geopolitical strategy. The Federal Reserve can print all the money it wants, but it cannot force a sovereign foreign entity to lend that money back into the American economy. If Canada pulls its capital, interest rates in the United States spike. The housing market, already teetering on the edge of affordability, collapses as financing dries up. Small businesses, unable to get their operating loans, lay off workers. And who pays the price? It is not the diplomats. It is the American worker who suddenly finds their home underwater and their job gone because two groups of capitalists are fighting over who controls the North Pole. This is the vulnerability of the United States. We have financialized our economy to such a degree that we are addicted to foreign capital. We consume more than we produce, and we borrow the difference. For decades, we borrowed it from our friends. We borrowed it from Japan, from Europe, from Canada. We assumed that because they were our military subordinates, they had no choice but to lend to us. But this Project Maple Leaf, this move by Mark Carney and the Canadian elite, is a signal that the days of automatic obedience are over. They are building a sovereign capacity. That word, sovereign, is the key. It means they want the ability to say no. And in the world of finance, the ability to say no is the ability to crash your neighbor's economy. We must also look at the timing. Why now? Why are they doing this at this specific moment in history? It is because they see what we see. They see a United States that is deeply unstable. They see a political system in Washington that is paralyzed by polarization. They see a society tearing itself apart. Capital is cowardly. I have said this many times. Capital runs away from instability. The Canadian ruling class is looking at the United States and saying, this ship is taking on water. We need to build our own lifeboat. They are decoupling. They are hedging their bets. They are preparing for a world where the U.S. dollar is no longer the king, where the U.S. military is no longer the guarantor of safety, but a source of danger. This brings us to the most tragic irony of the situation. The American government spends nearly $1 trillion a year on defense. We have bases in 80 countries. We have the most expensive weapons ever created, and yet our national security is threatened not by a foreign army, but by our own economic fragility. We have hollowed out our productive base. We have allowed our infrastructure to rot. We have treated our working class with contempt. And now even our closest neighbor, the country that is supposed to be our cultural and historical twin, is looking at us and seeing a security threat. They are seeing a failing state next door, and they are arming themselves against the fallout. Now, the mainstream media will try to spin this. They will try to tell you that this is just about modernization or NATO commitments. Do not believe them. You do not spend $6.6 billion on sovereign kill chains and independent operations if you trust your alliance. You do this because you are preparing for a divorce. And like any divorce involving vast sums of money and shared assets, it is going to be messy. It is going to be expensive. And the children, in this case, the working people of both countries, are going to be the ones who suffer. So what is the lesson here for us? What is the takeaway for the Marxian analyst? It is that imperialism is not a static system. It is dynamic. It is prone to crisis. The alliances that seem eternal are actually temporary agreements between gangs of capitalists. When the profit rates fall, when the markets shrink, the gangs turn on each other. The special relationship between the U.S. and Canada was based on U.S. dominance and Canadian submission. As U.S. dominance fades, Canadian submission ends. That is the dialectic of history playing out in real time. We are entering a period of profound danger. The economic war is already here. The military preparations are beginning. The rhetoric of security threats is being normalized. And through it all, the working class is being asked to pick a side. We are being asked to wrap ourselves in the flag and hate the Canadian, or hate the American, or hate the Chinese. We must refuse. We must understand that the Canadian worker has more in common with the American worker than either of them has with Mark Carney or the Pentagon generals. The crisis of the US-Canada relationship is a symptom of the crisis of global capitalism. It is a system that cannot solve its problems through cooperation, only through competition and conflict. It is a system that turns neighbors into enemies and trade into a weapon. The $6.6 billion move is just the beginning. It is the first crack in the ice. And if we do not organize, if we do not build a movement that challenges the very logic of this system, we are going to fall right through that crack into a very cold, very dark future. Thank you for listening. This is Richard Wolff.